Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's Top 15 Star Trek Character Assassinations. In this video, I list the 15 worst character assassination attempts on a character in the Star Trek franchise. This is a Patreon requested video, requested by Norman Buchwald. Norman, thanks so much for your request. So by character assassination, I don't mean like literally a character tries to assassinate him or her. I mean that the writers assassinate their character by writing for them very poorly, writing them completely out of character, in some ways like ruining their character, giving them traits that they absolutely should not have in a way that destroys their character and it just makes them a bad character, an uninteresting character, and it shouldn't do it, and it's totally bad writing. So this list obviously is just my opinion of what I think the worst examples, and of course some people may disagree with some of my entries and think that it's not character assassination, but I personally do. That's what it's for. And I think there's also a sort of a fine line on how I define character assassination, because I do think that there's a difference between character assassination, just a poorly written episode that's just written poorly all around and it's just a terrible episode, and the character is not necessarily out of character per se, it's just a shitty episode. Some examples of this for me would be Jake Sisko in The Muse, because Jake is not necessarily out of character. He's kind of, for the most part, in character. It's just a stupid story about a succubus like sucking the energy out of him as he writes. Like, that's a dumb concept, and the way it's executed is terrible, and the guest character is goofy, and so that's not necessarily Jake, assassination. That's just a bad episode. I mean, it kind of sucks for him that he's the star of such a shitty episode, but that's still, again, it's a kind of a fine line of what I would call character assassination. And same thing with Quark for Prophet and Lace, which is, as you know, if you're familiar with my channel, in my opinion, the worst episode of the entire Star Trek franchise. However, I don't think it's character assassination for Quark, because Quark is not necessarily out of character, because he has been portrayed as a misogynist and an egotist, and so that's kind of in character for him. It's just the episode plays it for laughs, and it's not fucking funny, and it's offensive and terrible, so that's not necessarily having to do with character assassination. It has to do with just the episode sucking all around. So, and then, some people may disagree with me on some of these calls, but that's just the calls I'm making on how I am defining character assassination anyway. So before I get into my top 15, and no one originally requested a top 10, but I was like, I can't limit it just to 10. I really want to talk about at least 15 of these. I actually came up with 25, but that's too much to really talk about. But I am going to very quickly just shoot through, very quickly list off my number 25 through my number 16. And then I'll get into more detail when we get to my top 15. Okay, so anyway, enough preamble. Let's jump into this. Top 25 worst character assassinations in Star Trek. Start with my number 25, which is Homeward, Jean-Luc Picard. Number 24 is Wrong's Darker Than Death or Night, where Kira Nerys characters is assassinated. 23 is The Fight, where Chakotay, his character, is assassinated. 22 is Extreme Risk, where B'Elanna Torres's character is assassinated. 21 is Darkling, where Kes is assassinated. Well, the Doctor kind kind of is too, but I have another spot for him. Number 20 is The Disease, where Harry Kim, his character, is assassinated. Number 19 is Meridian, where we got good old Jadzia Dax has a character assassination. Number 18 is The Lights of Zatar, where Montgomery Scotty is assassinated, figuratively speaking. And number 17, Let He Who Is Without Sin, where of course Worf, his character's assassinated because he killed a kid in a soccer match. So he did the assassination, I guess. Anyway, and number 16 is Human Nature, where 7 of 9 has a big old character assassination. So now we'll get into my top 15, getting into a bit more detail now. It's cream of the crop for me, the really bad character assassination. So we'll start with my number 15, which is That Which Survives. And the character that is assassinated in this episode is Spock. So I actually don't think this is a terrible episode. I actually kind of like it, even it's kind of a guilty pleasure for me. But it's mainly the Kirk storyline. I do acknowledge that the Spock storyline, because there's a second storyline where Spock takes command of the Enterprise and they're flung across the galaxy and the ship is like going to explode, and because, you know, the alien invaders are trying to tamper with the engines, and Scotty and McCoy are trying to help him, and Spock is being 100% out of character in this episode. He's being really obtuse, like he doesn't understand human behavior. And this is in the 3rd season, where we've seen 2.5 seasons of him understanding human behavior. I mean, he may find humans annoying and may not like emotions, but he understands them. He understands figures of speech. Where in here, like, Scotty does a lot of figures of speech and expressions. Spock's like, use your words more carefully. That's not true. And then at the end of the episode, when Scotty saves everyone's life, Spock goes on a rant, just babbling on about why do you express the need to express emotion, blah 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 blah. And he's like a total dick. He's like yelling at ensigns for like being just a strickler. And this is not how Spock usually behaves. Like, who the fuck wrote for him in this episode? They just turned him into a giant dick, and they don't understand how to write for him. Anyway, next we'll get to my number 14, A Night in Sickbay. The character that is assassinated is Jonathan Archer. So, this is such a bad episode. One of the worst episodes of the show, of the franchise. But one of the things I will disagree with people right off the bat, because a lot of people think that Archer is being very prideful in this episode and refusing to apologize to these aliens who are pissed off with him because, Porthos peed on the tree. And people are like, oh, he's risking the whole ship for his pride and he's being ridiculous. In this case, I actually side with Archer, which is probably why this only makes my number 14 and not higher, because I'm on Archer's side on this. Fuck those aliens. They said it was okay for Porthos to beat him down when Archer gave them, like, Porthos his biology and everything, and they knew what he was, and they gave him permission to beam down. And not only that, but the main issue here is that Porthos is dying from a disease that they should have fucking warned Archer about, because he gave him all this shit in advance. And they have the nerve to bitch at Archer while his dog was dying, which they're mostly responsible for. Fuck those guys. They had like some warp coral or something that Enterprise needed, and so everyone, like a trip, and T'Pol was like, come on, Captain, you gotta suck it up and apologize to them. You know what? If I was Archer, I think Archer was too nice to those fucking aliens. If it was me, I would have told those aliens to shove that warp coral right up their ass and tell them to go fuck themselves. And maybe beam down and piss on the tree myself. And yes, I'd make a great captain. But despite the fact that I disagree with people on that, it is still character assassination for Archer, because the whole romance of being love struck with T'Pol and like sleeping in Phlox's, sick bay, and it's kind of character assassination for Phlox as well. Like that dream sequence they had with Archer is like one of the worst. Is the worst dream sequence I think, and it's definitely in Star Trek history, and it's so goofy and stupid and portrays Archer like a total moron. And the fact that he said, "I'm doing the best I can," get it? Because he's thinking about boobies. It's so dumb. And the worst scene in this episode for me is the one where Archer is like doing the the whatchamacallit, the walking thing, the thing I have like a brain fart at the moment, but the treadmill, that's the word I'm looking for. He's on the treadmill next to T'Pol, and he keeps going faster, and T'Pol goes faster, and he does to keep up with her, where she's a fucking Vulcan, so she can obviously do a much higher rate than he can, but he still has to prove himself, so he's obviously exhausting himself and pretending like he's not. It's like that is such a character assassination. Like, that's so petty. It's just ruined his episode. Now, whether or not Archer recovered from this, because this is something I should touch on for each entry, whether or not they recovered from it. I think he did, because I think he was damaged. Actually, it did damage his image for maybe most of season 2, but by season 3 they kind of moved on from that into a different storyline with the Xindi, so he eventually recovered from this. But anyway, next we'll get into my number 13, which is Cupid Errant's Arrow, and the character that was assassinated in this episode is Beckett Mariner. So, yeah, this is an early episode of Lower Decks, to be fair, before they really got Mariner's character right. And there was a couple episodes before this where they portrayed her too much as a Mary Sue, like she was like perfect at absolutely everything. And it was to a degree that was maddening. Well, that's not the problem with this episode. The problem is, and this is definitely a hard episode to watch in retrospect once you've seen later episodes of Lower Decks and you've seen how great Mariner's friendship is with Boimler and how they have an amazing friendship, where here she is an absolute terrible friend. She is just totally despicable. Boimler has a girlfriend who's kind of hot, and her first reaction is to be like, this is an alien, something's wrong, something can't be wrong, because the hot girl would never date you. Like, what a fucking dick. Like, what a bad friend. And she goes, like, has, like, what they call the murder boards, where she has all the pictures and the tapes going through the thing and going on this crazy conspiracy. So not only does it portray her as a terrible friend, but kind of fucking insane and petty. And just kind of like but in a way that's like not goofy or funny, but in a way that makes her a terrible person. And it's just despicable. Now, whether or not her character recovered, but definitely by season 2, I would say, maybe even a little bit towards the end of season 1, they were definitely portraying her better in season 1, but the stench of this episode is kind of still. And by the way, this whole premise, she ended up being right in this episode, and she was right that it was like a weird virus or something, which is kind of disgusting that the writers would write it that way. But it's completely contradicted in season 3, where there was a lot of hot chicks just hitting on Boimler, but he was completely oblivious to it. So they like flipped it around. So they did. I think that was a intentional course correction to try to make up for this bullshit episode. Anyway, we will next get into my number 12, which is Strange New World. Not to be confused with Strange New Worlds. That's an episode in Strange New Worlds. Strange New World, singular, not plural, is like the third episode of, or third or fourth episode of Enterprise, depending on how you quantify it. And so the character that is assassinated in this episode is Trip, or the entire Enterprise crew, perhaps. Now, granted, like, Trip was affected by this virus or whatever, but it kind of sort of, it just means that he was like tripping or something. And I know they were trying to sort of accentuate his distrust of T'Pol and Vulcans in general. But the way it was like, oh, there's shadow people going, like, I don't care like how intoxicated or how twisted their mind was by a virus. Like, they were acting like idiots, like total morons. And I want to say it wasn't just this away team. It was like the whole crew. Like when they first beamed down, they were being totally goofy, like, oh, let's go camping and set up a campfire and some marshmallows and whatever. And it was just, and don't even bring up Star Trek 5. I could have put that down as character assassination too, but I didn't go there. But no, just the whole way they were being so fucking goofy and the way team definitely, Trip in particular, but also Reed and the other people who were down there were just, I don't care that they were affected by the virus, like the fact that they were like, there's shadow people, listen, Captain, it's just completely ruined their characters. And I also could have went with what's it called, Unexpected. I believe was the name of the episode. I could have went with that for Trip, but to me that's more of a case that I was talking about earlier, where it's just a bad episode, where Trip is not necessarily out of character per se. It's just everyone else is being a dick in that episode. But anyway, so did Trip ever recover? I'm gonna say no. I'm actually gonna say that he didn't really recover, and that's if you know me, you know I don't like Trip as a character, and maybe this episode kind of completely shattered and ruined his image for me going forward. Even though he has some good storylines, particularly in season 3 and 4, there's some good episodes with him in it. Similitude is a great episode. But I never thought of his character. I always thought of him as an incompetent, goofy moron. And it started here. Well, I mean, to be fair, the pilot, he was kind of portrayed that way too. But this is what really assassinated his character. So no, I don't think he ever recovered. Anyway, next we'll get into my number 11, which is, in theory, the character assassinated in this episode was Data. So, I railed against this episode when I reviewed it, because the thing is, I like the concept of it. Like, would be a good episode in theory, but in practice, they completely destroyed Data's character. Because I love the concept of Data getting involved with a woman in a romantic relationship, and I think there was a lot of really good story opportunities here, but instead a lot of people say they reverted his character back to season 1, but I would say it's worse than that. They did more than just revert him back to season 1 when this episode aired at the end of season 4. He was completely obtuse and misunderstood everything he knew about human beings. And just the way, particularly the scene, like the way it starts off in the relationship is actually good, and the way he asks everyone for advice is actually good. Where the episode goes wrong is the scene where he's like acting all goofy and like, can I get you a drink, dear? And then starts yelling at her, you're not my mother! You're not my mother. I thought we were supposed to fight. Like, he doesn't understand basic human interactions. Now, granted, the bullshit excuse that this episode tries to give for that is, well, he's never been in a romantic relationship before, so he doesn't know the parameters, so he's just emulating stuff he saw on TV or read in a book or whatever. But I don't buy that. Like, that Data has been known. He has a lot of human-esque qualities. Like, he definitely, regardless of how you think of Data, he's definitely been proven and shown to be better at human interaction and more knowledgeable than that. Like, take, for example, the episode where he does kind of sort of get in a romantic relationship, Instance of Command, he doesn't start acting like a complete fucking moron because this woman kisses him. He doesn't start going, "You're not my mother," and bullshit like that. He just bees himself. And, and the fact that he tells, Counselor Troy in this episode, there's no real me when it comes to relationship. But, I don't know. It feels like that was the excuse that the writers just put in it to why they were going to have Data act like he totally instantly forgot everything he knew about a human interaction in 1 second. It's just it was an assassination on Data's character. Some writers just Joe Manowski, excuse me. Some writers just don't know how to write for Data, period. Anyway, next, we'll get into... Oh, wait, did I say whether or not he recovered? He did. Data definitely recovered from this one. It was just a one-episode, one-time thing. Next, once good writers got their hands on Data's character, it was fine. But this episode just stands out as terrible. Anyway, next we'll get into my number 10. Now getting into my top 10. And number 10 is In the Flesh, and the characters that were assassinated in this episode is Species 8472. So now I'm getting a bit out there, going from a character to like a whole group, species. But the thing is I think this one is definitely worth noting because Species 8472 and the episode Scorpion were portrayed as space Nazis, like people, a race from a fluidic space who looked at our galaxy as unnatural and that it needed to be purified and that everyone needed to be wiped out and that they were this biologically like superior and like were far beyond, and they'd like made Ensign Kim like suffer and being eaten from the inside, just for the hell of it. And their intention was to like wipe out everyone. And they said, what was that? I forget their saying, but they had like a saying that was similar to resistance is futile. It's like the weak will perish. That was it. So they were like evil above evil and just shown as malevolent and not giving a shit, kind of like Nazis. Like they're shown as seeing all human life form as inferior in need of being wiped out. And the episode Prey, I think, is fine. I think it did portray Species 8472 as a bit more sympathetic, but it was a different situation, so I could buy how they were portrayed in that episode. In this episode, however, it's a total fucking retcon, and not only that, it's like completely destroys this race that's why they never really appear after this episode, because it completely assassinated them, completely destroyed them, and it totally goes against their character 100%, because instead of now being like space Nazis who want to purify everyone because they see themselves as genetically and biologically superior, all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, you're the ones that attacked us. You went after us. You made an alliance with the Borg and went after us. No. And plus, they're disguising themselves as human beings in order to infiltrate Starfleet. They have this superior technology that was able to destroy like hundreds of Borg ships. Why the fuck would they go on an undercover mission? If they wanted to wipe out Starfleet, they could just fucking do it. And here's the other thing. Not only that, they're portrayed as total fucking morons. Because they're like, they don't even know that Starfleet Academy is not in the Delta Quadrant. Not only that, when Janeway tries to point out that Starfleet Academy or Starfleet is not in the Delta Quadrant, they don't believe her. So they're able to replicate Starfleet Academy to the like smallest little detail, all the aliens, the blades of grass, the books on the wall. They get all these details right, yet they don't even know that it's not in the fucking Delta Quadrant. So on top of everything, they're morons. They're weak morons who are like, oh, we were just wanted peace. You're the ones that attacked us. No. That completely and utterly destroys their character. It is maddening to watch this crappy episode. Anyway, we'll get into my number 9, which is Renaissance Man. The character assassinated in this episode is the Doctor. So, this comes towards the end of the show. It's, in fact, the penultimate episode of the entire show. And arguably, the Doctor's character has been slowly starting to be picked off and assassinated throughout all of Season 7. The two-parter In the Flesh could have actually been called out as the two-parter that really assassinated his character because it made him selfish and made him another character assassination episode for him could have been Arthur is another one where he treated all his friends who just wanted the best for him like shit and was completely insensitive to their feelings. But on top of all that, I really had to pick Renaissance Man as this is the final nail in the coffin, as they say. This is the one that really finished off the job. They were slowly picking off of his character with a knife, and it wasn't until this episode where they finally got out a gun and put him out of his misery to get the metaphors when they really assassinated his character, because it's completely inconsistent with how he's been portrayed, and they turned him into a Mary Sue. They Mary Sued him. They made him so that he was invincible, that when he did this flip when Tuvok was trying to shoot him, and he did this flip up against the wall and shot Tuvok, I literally started laughing hysterically, because that is so fucking stupid. That is so dumb. That is so out of character. He wasn't portrayed as this invincible machine that could take down fucking Tuvok and deceive the entire crew. He should be shitty at this if they were to keep him in this character. And plus the whole thing that he's doing this to save Janeway's life, when he is smart enough to know that they're just going to kill her anyway, and she's giving him an order not to do it, and she's defying her orders and attacking the entire crew. Not only could he definitely could not pull this off. So this is just terrible writing, and it's assassinating his character in that way, turning him into a Mary Sue. But on top of that, he wouldn't even try. This totally goes against everything in his character. So yeah. Now, I think whether or not he recovered from this is probably not the right question, because this is the penultimate episode. So I guess the real answer is no. I mean, he did appear in Prodigy, and he was fine in that episode, and there was almost 30-year gap in between, so by that time it's kind of forgotten, so you could say yeah, he did recover. But as far as Voyager goes, the show itself, the answer is no. And then he will appear in Starfleet Academy. We'll see how they portray him, because he wasn't in Prodigy all that much. He was mainly just the Doctor and doing these silly jokes and stuff. So we'll see how they do with it when he appears in Starfleet Academy. But as far as Voyager goes, no, he never recovered, because this is the second to last time they showed him, and they were slowly killing off his character, arguably since season 6 actually, but season 7 it definitely escalated, and yeah, so no. Character assassinated. Okay, so next we will get into my number 8, which is Choose Your Pain. Saru is the character that was assassinated. So this is again, early episode, like episode 3 or 4 of Discovery, but I really had to put this in there because I thought Saru was actually an interesting character in the first couple episodes. He stood on principle, he saw through Burnham's bullshit, and he was right to distrust her when she returned to Discovery. But this episode, so he was a good character before this episode, but then this episode completely assassinated his character because not only did it portray him as incompetent, because Captain Lorca was like, got captured by Klingons or some shit, hung out with Harry Mudd. It's another whole thing. In this episode, so Saru had to take command of Discovery, and he was acting like he didn't know how to fucking command. Like, he's the first officer. Like, they were playing him as totally incompetent, that he was looking up legendary captains like Pike and Kirk. Not Kirk, it would be before Kirk. Like, Pike and April and Archer, I think, was another one. Looking them up to try to emulate, how do I actually be a good copy? So first of all, yeah, I was portraying him as incompetent, but the bigger assassination here is the fact that he was ordering the torture of a sentient being. That Burnham was flat out telling him that this is a sentient being, and you're ordering us to freaking torture them to death, possibly. And he was like, his response to that was like, shut the fuck up and do your job, or I'll court-martial you again. Or don't disobey my orders because we have to save the captain. We have to do these things, so go ahead and torture this sentient being. He should have been drummed out of Starfleet. I don't give a fuck. And then they made this worse in the next episode where the Admiral supported this decision and in fact was putting someone down or yelling at someone for Stamets fucking taking the DNA or whatever so that they didn't have to torture the being anymore. I'm like, you fucking serious? I know it's a genetically engineered thing and Starfleet hates it, but no, fuck that. Starfleet is never okay. I don't give a fuck about any situation. Starfleet's never okay with torturing innocent sentient beings. Even if they're not innocent, even if they killed a bunch of people, you still can't torture fucking sentient beings. So, granted, they kind of assassinated Starfleet's character and this, but particularly Saru, because he was the one that was totally for this. I mean, Lorca kind of would have been okay since we know where he's actually from. But the fact that fucking it was the Admiral Cornwell or whatever who fucking supported it, like, yeah, they assassinated all of Starfleet's character, but mainly Saru in this episode is my focus. And so the question of did Saru ever recover, I'm going to say yes, he did. Because this is the early episode, as I said. I think it did take a while, particularly to gain my trust back, because I did not trust this character at all anymore. I thought he was fucking despicable, and that he should, every time I saw him on screen, I'm like, he should be in prison right now for torturing a sentient being. Like, he should, let alone like be in Starfleet, he should be like in a prison cell. Like, that's what I kept thinking every single time I saw him. But eventually they kept portraying him well and doing a good job, and by like the later seasons he's an awesome character, probably one of the best of the show. So eventually I forgot it, but it took me a while to get over this huge assassination. Anyway, next we'll get into my number 7, which is Sons and Daughters, and the character that was assassinated in this episode was Alexander Roshenko. Now, I could also say Worf was also kind of like a double assassination. You could say Alexander and Worf, but Worf, and I'll get to this question first, whether or not they recovered. Worf did. Alexander did not. Never, to this day, his character is completely assassinated. Now, I was hoping that one day Modern Trek will show him and save his character and be like, no, he actually became an ambassador or whatever. But Worf, I mean, in some ways, Worf's character was never saved, though, because he is known as a bad father. And it's this episode's fault. to be honest. Or, you could say it was even when they brought him to Deep Space Nine and Alexander wasn't with them. It was like, oh, he's back with my grandparents. That's kind of put the nail in the coffin of Worf being a terrible father. Because I just finished watching TNG, and actually, he wasn't that bad of a father. There were some definitely issues, particularly with the start, but they were kind of understandable. Like, he didn't know how to be a parent, and it took him a while to get used to it. And the episode Firstborn kind of ended on a high note. It ended with him becoming a good father, with him saying, I understand you, Alexander. You want to go a different path, and I'm not going to force you to be a warrior. And it was a really, ended on a high note, they were going to have a strong relationship going forward. And then Deep Space Nine comes along, and all of a sudden he's back in fucking Earth. He just sent him away. And then this episode comes. First of all, Alexander ages 15 years within the span of 2 years, which I know they kind of did that with him already, but that doesn't make it better. It kind of makes it worse that they're doing it again. And then he decides to join the Klingon military. And Worf is very rightfully like, what the fuck are you doing here? I thought this is the last thing you wanted to do. It was don't talk to me, father. I do what I want. No, you're not my father, blah, blah, blah. This totally goes against his character, completely and utterly destroys his character. This is nothing like him. The episode Firstborn was actually a great way. It was a great way to finalize Alexander's storyline, being he's going his own path. He's going to become an ambassador in the future. And this fucking takes that great storyline that they set up in Firstborn. It takes a giant sledgehammer and just smashes the fuck out of it. Ah! Smash! God damn it! It smashes the fuck out of the storyline and completely destroys his character. And so, no, he has never recovered from this. And he appeared one more time in the wedding episode, which it was fine, but it still is why the fuck is he in the military? And and not only is he in the military, he's fucking incompetent, and he's the joke, and people are laughing at him. So why, if you're incompetent at being in the military, why the fuck are you in the military? And plus, it goes against your character. You made it clear that you didn't want to be a warrior repeatedly. What the fuck are the writers even thinking with this bullshit? Sorry. Anyway, let me get into... maybe I should have had this one higher now that I'm thinking of it. Anyway, let me get into my number 6, which is Dark Frontier, and the characters that were assassinated in this episode were the Borg. So I'm not going to say the Borg Queen was assassinated in this episode because she was never a good character to begin with. And that's another sort of criteria for my character assassination. If the character always sucked, then it's not assassination. It was just a bad character. Like Vic Fontaine, for example. I don't have him on this list because he was never assassinated because he always sucked. And it's the same thing with the Borg Queen. However, the Borg themselves were great characters. It was a great adversary, very scary, in some of the best episodes, Best of Both Worlds, Scorpion, Drone is one of my favorite, Borg, some of the best episodes used the Borg. And First Contact is the movie that introduced the Borg Queen, and the Borg Queen is part of what completely assassinated the Borg's character. But I can still tolerate her a bit more in First Contact. In First Contact, I have a lot of issues with it. I don't think it's nearly as good as a lot of people make it out to be. But it's still passable. To me, it's not what completely assassinated the Borg's character and turned them into goofy, dumb, cartoon character villains. It was this episode. This is where it started. This is where it really started. They brought back the Borg Queen, which is something they should have kind of retconned the Borg Queen and pretended she never existed. But no, they brought her back, and they made her worse. They made her... I don't think it was this episode. I think it was subsequent episodes where they had her go, Janeway, every time they saw her. But in this episode... the Borg were portrayed as goofy, dumb, easy to defeat morons, and unfortunately it remained this way for the rest of Voyager and into Picard season 3, which I'm not even gonna fucking get into that shit. The Borg were no longer scary. The Borg were like such an ominous, scary force because they were unstoppable. They were one collective mind. But now they're very much very stoppable, and they're also a bunch of fucking idiots who come up with these elaborate, dumbass schemes to... Again, this is kind of similar to what I said about Species 8472. This is Voyager writing in the later seasons for you. Gotta love fucking Brennan Braga and Rick Berman for ruining Voyager. But anyway, so... And Joe Manowski who fucking helped write this episode. But anyway, it portrays him as coming up with these elaborate, over-the-top schemes to get Earth. And like I said with Species 8472, if they want to destroy Earth, just fucking go to Earth and destroy it. You can like send a bunch of Borg cubes. They send one, Earth barely defeats them. Send 5, send fucking 10. And you can get it in like heartbeats. If you really want Earth this badly, this whole thing, we're going to create this human virus, and they fucking put in these, one of the worst retcons of the whole fucking franchise was saying, 7 of 9 was actually a plant that the Borg Queen put on Voyager purposely. No, she fucking wasn't. Jesus Christ, that episode was just written like a year before this one, and they completely forgot everything, but they didn't give a fuck about anything. It's just completely and utterly destroyed the Borg's character. And as to whether or not they recovered, the answer to this is no. They never recovered. The Borg were always crappy, goofy, cartoonish villains who are over the top and dumb and say Scooby-Doo shit like Janeway for the rest of the franchise. Anyway, next we will get into my number 5, getting into the top 5 now. Worst character assassinations. Getting to my number 5, which is Equinox Part 2. And the character that was assassinated in this episode was Kathryn Janeway. Now, Janeway has been portrayed out of character for actually several episodes. I think part of the problem with Janeway is the writing was never that consistent. I mean, there is, in my mind, a consistent character of Janeway, but other writers had constantly come in and fucked it up. Like, I could have also put the episode Night as a character assassination for Janeway, because she's all of a sudden locking herself in her room, being depressed about the fact that she trapped in the Delta Quadrant when it happened like 5 fucking years ago, and it took her that long to lock. Like, what the fuck is that bullshit? And there's other episodes I can't even think of right now, but there's more that kind of show her completely out of character. But this is the worst. This is easily the worst, where she becomes a despicable character. Like this whole episode, I'm thinking, fuck her. Like, she goes on this kill crazy revenge path where she starts to disregard everything she knows about Starfleet. She disregards her own friends. She tortures the crew of the Equinox and threatens to have them killed, and makes the deal with these aliens to get all the crew killed. And she goes to these extremes, and when Chakotay rightfully tries to hold her back, she has him relieved of duty. And then Tuvok takes over as first officer, and when he tries to rightfully point out, you can't do this, she threatens to relieve him of duty. Like, I'm kind of pissed off in this episode with Tuvok. Like, he should have stood up to her more. He should have been like, no, you're relieved of duty, and put Chakotay back in command, because obviously she's lost her fucking mind. And at the end of the episode, it's supposed to be, A-OK that she was going on a murder, rampage, because Ransom changed his mind, and now she's like, oh, I forgive you. It was fucking terrible. And to the question of whether or not Janeway, her character, recovered, I would say kind of no. Like, it's not a firm no. It's more of like a kind of no, because like she had some good episodes after this. Like, there were some episodes that portrayed her correctly, but this kind of tarnished her name. Like, going forward, I can never really look at her the same way. So yeah, I would kind of say no. So next we'll get into my number 4 worst character assassination for the Star Trek franchise, and that is Journey's End. The character that was assassinated in this episode was Wesley Crusher. So I had just reviewed this episode. In fact, this is what inspired Norman, after seeing my review, to request this video, because I railed against how Wesley's character was assassinated in this episode. Because... for one thing, it's like I don't even know where to begin. Like, everything about his portrayal in this episode was just total horseshit and just a complete character assassination. But let's begin with him coming on board and acting like an emu, like acting all like angsty and like being a dick to Geordi and being a dick to his mother and being like, "Oh, it looks like your engineering sucks, Geordi," and just being like a total dick and being like, "Oh, fuck everyone," and going out and getting stoned in the fucking smoking room or whatever the fuck it was, and like having hallucinations of his dad who's high on peyote, space peyote, whatever the fuck, and then he quits Starfleet and goes off to join Traveler. Now, I don't really feel like repeating everything I said in my review for that episode, but suffice to say, this is completely and totally not what they had planned for Wesley. It's very clear that he was always meant to be a Starfleet captain. This was always his destiny. This is always the destiny that he wanted. It's always the destiny that he deserved. And when the Traveler was talking about, and the first season was talking about how he's like Mozart, but with mathematics, it's obvious that the Traveler was wanting him to excel in his own society. And in fact, he made that very clear, saying, "I don't want to interfere. I don't want anyone else to interfere." And yet in this episode, he takes him out of time and says, "Come on, journey with me into the realms of existence." I'm sorry, but I would call that fucking interfering. Like, this is clearly not what he wanted for Wesley. So it also retcons the Traveler, but that's the lesser crime here that assassinates the Traveler's character. But the bigger crime is assassinating Wesley's character, because this is pretty damning. Because he quit Starfleet and became a Traveler, and later they'll retcon what that means to be a Traveler, because in season 1, Travelers were just tourists who go around experiencing life with other cultures, but in fucking Picard season 2, all of a sudden the Travelers are a group of guardians protecting the entire galaxy, which is complete and utter bullshit. And this is absolutely not what Wesley wanted to do. And it totally goes against his character, destroys everything established about him, and clearly he should want to stay in Starfleet. And that's what he was meant to do. Now, it's a shame because the movie Nemesis almost retconned this. Because it had a scene with Wesley being in Starfleet saying, "I'm joining Riker and the Titan." Unfortunately, that scene was deleted, and so it's not considered canon anymore, which is a fucking shame, because it would have been so great if they had retconned this bullshit. But as to the question of whether or not Wesley's character ever recovered, thanks to Prodigy, I'm actually going to say yes. Even though it's still a total retcon, 100% retcon, never should have happened, and this episode never should have happened. 100% goes against his character, 100% goes against what everything's been established about the Travelers. But Prodigy Season 2 used him very well. He was a very eccentric, fun character, and then you kind of got that this was a good place for Wesley to end up. So because Prodigy Season 2 used him so well, I am going to say he did recover, but this never should have happened, and it's still a terrible retcon. So, next, we will get into my number 3, which is Galaxy's Child. The character that was assassinated in this episode is Geordi LaForge. So yeah, he's a fucking creep. They turned him into a creep. Now, a lot of people complain about his behavior in Booby Trap, but here's what I say. People on the holodeck, people are allowed to do whatever they want to do in the holodeck. Like, what happens in the holodeck stays in the holodeck. Now, granted, he shouldn't have been doing that in the middle of a fucking emergency when the whole Enterprise was about to be destroyed. But I think the computer was kind of misleading him. Like, the computer's the one who presented this facsimile of Brahms to be totally hitting on him hard out. So it's kind of like computer fucked that one up. So I don't know. I just blame Geordi less for that one. But there's no excuse for this one. This one, he is full on sexually harassing the real Leo Brahms. And inviting her to a work meeting and instead setting up for a romantic dinner and hitting on her hard out, making her extremely uncomfortable when they're supposed to be colleagues working together. And he continually hits on her, gives her unwanted advances, even when she makes it clear that she's not interested. And then she finds out that he was doing romance with a deep fake of her on the holodeck, and of course is very rightfully outraged, and he tries to gaslight her into saying, oh, you're just being mean to me. They make him, and that's it. I think saying that his character is creepy in this episode is being too generous. He's downright despicable in this episode, not just creepy. They completely ruin his character. Now, to the question of whether or not he recovers, I'm actually going to say yes. Because, again, this is pretty self-contained. I mean, other than Booby Trap. They do, like, this running thing of him, like, being awkward with women, which I think is terrible. I mean, in Transfigurations, they actually showed him being successful, so that was different. So that was outside of that. But then they got back to this in Galaxy's Child. And then there's several episodes after this where he's also... But, you know, there's episodes like Identity Crisis where he has a really strong, like, great platonic relationship with women, and The Inner Light. So I will say they recover. And I think in Aquiel, like, some people try to say he's being creepy in Aquiel, but I disagree, because he was just doing his job. Like, he was reading her personal logs because he was running a murder investigation. He thought that she was dead. And then granted, the way he points this out to her wasn't the best. Like, there was a better way to approach it, but I still don't think he was being creepy, and she actually reciprocated his feelings. So I think that episode actually kind of redeemed his character a bit, in my humble opinion. But, so yeah, I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say his character did recover, but goddamn did they destroy it in this episode. So, next we'll get into my number 2 worst character assassination, and that is The Loss. The character that was assassinated in this episode was Deanna Troi. So I know a lot of people will say that Deanna Troi was never a good character in the first place. Yet the writing on her is a lot more inconsistent. And there are a lot of bad episodes that feature her even after this, like Masterpiece Society. But there's also some good ones, like Face of the Enemy and Timescape. And I think season 7 really saves her character, actually. Like, I think that's probably the strongest season for her. But yeah, so, and even before season 7, even around this time, season 3 and 4, I don't think she was that bad outside of this episode. How do I say this? It turned her into a cruel narcissist. The fact that she had this privilege that no one else had, and she lost this privilege that she had over everyone else, and then decided to treat everyone else who's being sympathetic, who's trying to be the kindest, most gentle, most understanding to her as possible, started treating them like absolute garbage, absolute shit. Particularly Beverly, who was only trying to help her, and she was freaking out, losing her mind. And then treated Riker like shit, who I'm actually glad stood up to her and pointed out her hypocrisy and her bullshit. He said that she was acting aristocratic. He was 100% correct. Because it's not that she has a disability, it's that she's now on the same level as everyone else. She had a privilege. I made the analogy to someone who's like super rich and lost all their money and has to live like normal middle class people live, or working class people live, and bitching about and complaining about and being a dick to everyone around them. You know how the working class people would react to that? They'd be like, fuck you. You're just being privileged. And that's the exact same situation here. Now, and yeah, and not only that, it also portrayed her as completely incompetent, terrible at her job. She wanted to quit, and if I was Picard, I would have said something along the lines of, if you think you're no good to do this job without your powers, then you don't fucking deserve this job in the first place. And plus, like, they barely even show her powers. Like, her powers don't seem to be that strong in the first place for most other what they show her, so it's kind of inconsistent with the show. But anyway, completely ruined her. Now, as to the question of whether or not she recovered, I pretty much already answered this, because I said she was much better in season 7. So yes, she did recover. But, goddamn. I think it was hard to look at her the same after this episode, though. So finally, we'll get into my number 1 worst character assassination of the Star Trek franchise, and that is Sub Rosa. The character that was assassinated in this episode was Beverly Crusher. And she was assassinated because she did light the candle. And she went to the hoose. Yeah, I'm sorry, I had to put Sub Rosa at number 1. Because this could arguably fall in the lines of, it's just a terrible episode. But not only is it a terrible episode, it also assassinated her character. Not that Beverly Crusher was the best and strongest character in the show in the first place. She still had bad episodes like Suspicions and Remember Me that predated this one. But those did not do anything nearly as terrible, like completely and utterly destroy her character to nowhere near to the degree that it was in this episode. Because and I know a lot of this episode, the excuse is meant to be, well, she was under some alien spell and she was being hypnotized or like, drawn to this addiction. But the thing is that at the end of the episode, she breaks the addiction like that. So I kind of call bullshit on the whole being under a spell, because she's able to break out of it too fucking easily. And so the fact that she was reading her grandmother's journals about her grandmother having sex with a 30-year-old and finds it very sexy and it arouses her. This is kind of creepy, isn't it? Isn't that kind of, I'm not the only one that think that's fucking creepy. And that alone kind of assassinates her character. But on top of that, like, she, like, gives in to this fucking space ghost thing and goes, like, is acting like she's a complete drug addict and being like, oh, come here, I'm waiting, and freaking out. And then like instantly goes like, okay, I'm quitting Enterprise, bring me down, Energize. And Picard's like, whoa, what the fuck? What do you mean you're quitting? It's like, nah, it's pretty self-explanatory, Energize. And like, again, you can say this is bad writing, and it is. Oh, it is bad writing, but it's also assassinating her character. It is also like showing her as weak-willed, showing her as not giving a shit about anyone. Now, granted, she does eventually. Oh god, this episode's just so fucking stupid. But she does eventually, snap out of it because Picard's life is in danger, and that she sees the space ghosts attacking Geordi and Data while going into the body of her grandmother. You're not Nana! Nana's dead! Patracers is dumb. Patracers, and I'm sorry. I still put this at number 1, even how this episode's so goofy and I can't take it seriously, because it does destroy her character. Utterly annihilates her character, grinds it up into little shards by having her act so incredibly stupid. And then at the end, she tells Deanna that, at least Ronan loved my grandmother. No, she fucking didn't. He was like a parasite using her like the way he used you. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? So, yeah. Utterly destroyed her character. Now, to the question as whether or not she recovered from this, I want to say no. Even though, like, she wasn't that bad, and there are other portrayals after this in season 7, and the movies, and in Picard. But I want to say that she never recovered, because this is always in the back of your mind now. This is an image that anyone who's seen this episode can never erase from their minds of fucking Beverly orgasming when the green smoke is around her and saying, "You're not Nana! Nana's dead! Leave her alone!" So yes, I'm going to say that she did not recover from this. Anyway, that is it. Now we've reached the end of my list of my top 15 worst character assassinations of the Star Trek franchise. Thank you so much for watching this video. Thanks so much to Norman for suggesting this video. And if you would like to support the channel, you can support me on Patreon. There's different rewards for different tiers, such as requesting videos like this one. I have a Patreon-only series of videos that I do just for my Patreon supporters, where I revisit reviews that I've already done, like Sub Rosa, for example. And that you can find exclusively on Patreon. And also you can make comments that I'll leave in my episode reviews and stuff like that. Many different things. You can check it out if you so desire. Link in the description. Otherwise, if you still really like the channel, you still really want to support me, otherwise, you can do so by leaving a like, subscribing. All that things really help as well. And of course, I am currently covering Star Trek. Almost finished my coverage of The Next Generation. In the midst of my coverage of Deep Space Nine. In a couple months, we'll begin my coverage of Voyager. So you can check out my channel as I continue to do that. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.